Hello and welcome to this lovely day in October. It really is a nice, sunny, warm day given that we're in October. But enough of the weather. The reason for this video is to address a question that I'm sure I'm going to get asked by pretty well everyone since changing from my Lotus Exige V6 S into this Alfa Romeo 4C. And that question is, how does the Lotus Exige V6 S compare to this Alfa Romeo Spider? And to be fair, they are very similar cars. Both cars are completely stripped out, both are driver focused, neither car has any kind of power assisted steering, and in fact when you compare the Alfa Romeo 4C Spider with the Lotus Exige V6 Roadster, they have almost identical removable cloth roofs. So these are very similar cars. So the key question is, what makes the Lotus better than the Alfa Romeo, and what makes the Alfa Romeo better than the Lotus? I thought the best way to start this comparison off is to look at the advantages that the Lotus Exige V6 S has over the Alfa 4C, having owned the Lotus for over a year. And the first one has to be, without any question, performance. The Lotus, as I've said many times, the Lotus Exige V6 S was without question one of the fastest cars I've ever driven. I don't think I'll have a car that fast ever again. It was brutal on acceleration, and I'm absolutely certain that it could outperform this Alfa Romeo around a track, especially given that the Lotus has a track mode as well. And to a certain degree, even in the short few drives I've had with the Alfa, I have noticed that it does lack that sort of immediate punch that you got from the Lotus Exige V6 S. The Lotus, without question, was a real thrill to drive in that respect. You got a real buzz from hitting the accelerator. You don't quite get that same amount of punch, if that's the right word, from the Alfa Romeo 4C. Whoa! I mean, that's fast, but it's smooth fast. The other, and this stays with the engine of the Lotus, was the sound it made. The Lotus Exige V6 S makes an unbelievable noise when you're accelerating in that car, especially if you have it set to sport mode. Now, looking at the rest of the car, the Lotus was considerably slimmer than this Alfa Romeo 4C, and in fact it did come as something of a shock when I switched into this Alfa Romeo when I tried to put it in my garage, because the Alfa is so wide that it only just fits through the garage door, whereas the Lotus was considerably slimmer. And in fact, it's worth keeping in mind that this Alfa Romeo 4C, when the wing mirrors are out, is wider than a Ferrari 430, and that's pretty wide. Finally, the key difference with the Lotus, where it had an advantage, albeit small, was the cabin noise. Believe it or not, the cabin noise in this Alfa Romeo is louder and noisier than it was in the Lotus, even though the Lotus was pretty noisy, to say the least. I think a lot of that comes from the fact that the Alfa Romeo has a carbon fibre tub, and that technology seems to let a lot of road noise come through into the cabin because this car is so stripped out. Hence, I now have to use a microphone to get the audio, whereas I never did on the Lotus. So that's the advantages that the Lotus had over the Alfa Romeo. So let's look at the flip side of that and look at where I think the Alfa Romeo has the edge on the Lotus Exige V6, and as you're probably going to guess, there are quite a few, because otherwise I wouldn't have changed the car. And I'm going to compare these based on the interior of the car first and then the rest of it. So when we're looking at the interior of this Alfa Romeo 4C, the first key difference from the Lotus is of course the dashboard, and what we have here is a full LCD display. It's showing me far more information than the Lotus was able to tell me. I can now see, for example, the current time, the outside temperature. I've got a trip meter. In fact, I've got 2 trip meters. I can see, most importantly, tyre pressure monitoring system, so I can see that the tyres are okay. I've also got distance to refuel, all that kind of information, which on the Lotus is mainly, sadly, missing. It was just a very, very basic dashboard. Staying with the dashboard of the car, this is the other area where the Alfa has the advantage over the Lotus, because the Alfa Romeo actually has a visual parking distance meter on it. It's displayed on the dash, whereas although the Lotus did have a parking distance indicator, it was only an audible one. To have it visual makes it a lot easier to control the parking when you're reversing. Amazingly, the Lotus steering wheel had no adjustment at all, whereas this Alfa Romeo has a fully adjustable steering wheel, both up and down and backwards and forwards. The seats are another area where the Alfa has the edge over the Lotus, because these seats to me are certainly more comfortable, and they have an adjustment for incline as well as forward and backwards, which the Lotus doesn't have. You can't adjust the incline on the Lotus seats. And then we have the electric windows. This Alfa Romeo has, like the Lotus, electric windows. However, on this Alfa Romeo, I can open the windows by pressing the buttons, the control buttons, that are placed in the centre console of the car. On the Lotus Exige, the windows are controlled on the actual doors. Now, the problem with that is if I want to wind down the passenger window, I have to lean across the whole car to get to that control. So, having looked at the interior of the car, how does the Alfa Romeo stack up against the Lotus on the rest of it? Well, it has to be said straight off the bat, the Alfa obviously has the advantage of technology when it comes to the chassis. This Alfa Romeo has a carbon fibre tub, whereas the Lotus, of course, was based on aluminium. However, that said, I have to say, as a driver of both cars, I can't see how that makes any difference. I honestly can't say I'm getting or feeling any benefit from the driver's experience for the fact that this thing has a carbon fibre tub. Now, the other key area of difference where the Alfa stacks up against the Lotus is the gearbox. Now, I did have a flappy paddle gearbox on the Lotus Exige V6, and that's quite rare really. A lot of Lotus owners tend to go for the manual one. The gearbox that was on that Lotus, the flappy paddle gearbox, to me was perfectly acceptable, especially in sports mode. Most people complained about this change, the speed of change on the gears, but I found it perfectly acceptable for me, and I was extremely happy with the way it changed in automatic mode. It was absolutely amazing. However, the gearbox on this Alfa Romeo is a genuine double clutch gearbox, and therefore the changes when you're doing your gear changes are a lot quicker, they're a lot smoother, so it's definitely a better gearbox from the driver's point of view. And then we have one last thing which is going to be massively overlooked by most sports car owners, and that is emissions. You see, this Alfa Romeo with its 1750cc engine has considerably lower emissions than that of the Lotus, and not only that, it has considerably lower emissions than pretty well any other car in its performance range, and that makes a massive difference to sports car owners here in the UK, because linked to emissions is the cost of road tax, and this Alfa Romeo 4C is considerably less than half the cost of the annual road tax of the Lotus Exige V6 S. So that's a real key money saver, because the saving I can make per year on this Alfa Romeo as opposed to the Lotus will pretty well pay for its annual service. So in summary, I think whichever of those two cars you decide to go for, whether it would be the Alfa Romeo or the Lotus Exige V6 S, you're still going to get a very stripped out, driver focused, pretty noisy but extremely exciting car to drive. There is no question about that. What separates the two is the fact that the Alfa Romeo is more a car designed for people like me who want to drive it on a Sunday morning on B roads and not necessarily want to take it on a track. Whereas the Lotus Exige V6 is the flip side of that. It's essentially a track car for those who want to spend more of their time doing track days and embarrassing Ferraris and Porsches, and then perhaps doing the odd Sunday drives out on a B road. So there you have my brief comparison between the Alfa 4C that I'm driving now and the Lotus Exige V6 that I've just sold. Clearly for me, it's definitely been the right decision to go into this Alfa Romeo 4C, although it is only the fourth time I've driven it. It's early days, but I have no regrets about switching to this car. Yes, I do miss the instant thrill of acceleration I got from the Lotus, but because I'm not the kind of person who's into doing track days, the Alfa is definitely the right car for me. It's giving me some nice little features, extra features of comfort and information coming into the car that I prefer. Hope you've enjoyed the video, hope this comparison's been interesting, and look out for some new videos with the Alfa coming soon. Thanks for watching.